of development of AI tools and mainstreaming community voices in that space. And I hope that we can have a lively conversation. You can have questions for me and for the rest of us here. So looking forward to really an enriching engagement this morning.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Hope everyone's doing well. My name is Ruth. I'm with the GSMA. GSMA is the global body of telecom, and within GSMA, we have a Mobile for Development Foundation, and we really are very interested and working very hard to sort of understand and support the wider ecosystem and enabling environment for impactful, ethical, responsible, scalable AI solutions that can bring positive change. We fund AI-led innovations, but we also work at that ecosystem level, and language accessibility is a really, really core part of that. We view it as a value chain where different organizations, different players in this ecosystem all have a unique role to play. And I'm particularly excited to see so many of those players on the stage today. So really looking forward to hearing from everyone.
Thank you. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Sonia Jindal with the Gates Foundation. I actually work in U.S. education, post-secondary education, funding, AI and data infrastructure for low resource and underrepresented institutions and students. So I spend a lot of time thinking about human-centered technology, building infrastructure, and really helping close the gap when it comes to AI in underrepresented contexts. So what brings me to this conversation today is hopefully some cross-context learning around funding AI and data projects.
Good morning. Not on the slide yet. We're working on that, I believe. I was a late addition to the panel. My name is Tino Kreutzer. I'm with Kobo. Kobo is a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to supporting nonprofits around the world with better data collection technology. We have a tool called Kobo Toolbox. And we support about 35,000 organizations with better data collection, the majority of which are in Africa, for survey-based data collection, monitoring, evaluation, to really measure what brings impact into the humanitarian development, public health sectors in particular. And what brings us here today is we actually work really closely with Clear Global, and back then they were still called Translate Without Borders. We were really, for 5-6 years now, trying to see how do we go from just quantitative-based data collection surveys to fully qualitative tools that are AI supported. And since the very beginning, there was always this AI can do a lot, but African languages are generally excluded, vastly excluded, more than any other region in the world. How do we close that with investments through NLP built in and for African communities? So we'll talk about that more later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Since you're holding the mic, I'll just start with you, because now we're going to get into trying to start with the landscape. And for you, Tino, considering that Kobo has been building speech-to-text pipelines for African languages since 2022, what has that work been like? And what are some of the languages that you're resourcing in your training data?
Yeah, I'll start by saying that when we rolled out speech-to-text in Kobo in 2022, we are relying on commercial models primarily. So commercial models provide about 15 African languages today. For transcription, machine translation, we're about 20-30 languages. It is only the tip of the iceberg. It was sad for us to start that way, because when we first started working with Clear Global, we thought we were going to invest first of all in those languages that are not included in any commercial models. And we're finally working on this now. We have a pipeline of creating low resource languages from scratch, or even from an existing training data, to be able to transcribe that without having to rely on commercial models. But it is sad that within 5 or 6 years, the number of languages supported by commercial models has grown from about 5 to 6 to 7 to 10. It is a glacial pace, considering that we have about 3,000 languages in Africa not supported, including some of the biggest ones with millions of speakers. I think what's changed over the last few years in particular is that open data has evolved. If you go to Hugging Face today, you can see dozens and dozens of languages with training data. It is not all ready to go to create a model from scratch, but it is shortening sometimes the timeline, what it takes for languages like Kanuri or Hausa to have a relatively high quality models. So what we're working on now is not just focusing on building from scratch, but augmenting what already exists. And the landscape's changed, so there's a lot more players out there trying to do this. There's a lot more universities all across the continent that we can partner with. And that's clearly different from what it was 5, 6 years ago.
Thank you for that. And Sonia, just to kind of like also understand, like from your adjacent position in the US, what kind of projects have you been investing in?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I invest in data and AI infrastructure for US post-secondary education. So just really thinking about starting at the beginning, what sorts of data conditions need to be present for an institution that doesn't have a lot of resources to use AI in an effective manner. Often we find that AI is treated as just a small pilot at institutions, and it's not used at scale, or maybe institutions don't have the right data ecosystem to effectively use AI. So really thinking about how we can design technology particularly for these institutions that serve our focused students who are often underserved by technology, and really enable an effective use of AI and, like I said, build human-centered technology.
Thank you. And so Ruth, with GSMA and your role in Insights, you do have like a global view of where the language data set development is gaining momentum. Can you share briefly about the Bridging the Language Data Gap project?
Yeah, absolutely. So at GSMA, we are sort of globally focused, and because of our role sort of at the intersection of the mobile network operator industry, development, and tech, we have big partnerships, and by big, I mean with many people, not just big, but with many organizations. And one of the key focuses that we have is looking at language resourcing. So GSMA has 2 initiatives. One is the African Languages Initiative, where we're partnering with 8 of the leading mobile network operators, MNOs that everyone knows, Vodacom, MTN, Orange, etc., as well as academic institutes, tech, and some incredible initiatives that are out there, Lalapa, Masakane, who are really doing on-the-ground work to sort of build African language models. What we think about this, and going back to the value chain idea, is that one of the challenges, I mean, somebody was saying in the session this morning that data is often siloed. It's difficult to bring these ideas to scale. It's also very resource intensive. And one of the key roles of mobile network operators in this is that the thing that they have the most access to is scale. And they can reach last mile users. And there's not only can they reach them, but there's a really strong business imperative for them to do that. They need to reach their customers, and they need to really stay relevant and at high quality services in a very competitive market where most people have multiple SIM cards. So where we're starting to see the traction of MNOs really wanting to engage with this, we're starting to see some very interesting and exciting initiatives. I can talk later about what Orange is doing in Senegal, which is very, very cool, but also globally all over the world. There's a lot of really interesting stuff happening in different parts of Asia. One of our partners, Dialogue in Sri Lanka, is really at the front of this game, both in terms of the type of tech that they're investing in, and more importantly, the infrastructure around it, so that they're able to develop their own sovereign AI, which is, I'm sure, something we'll come on to later. But looking at how they're incorporating local languages in a way where, for example, women entrepreneurs can basically create apps and online services without coding in Tamil, in their own languages as well. So there's a lot of really interesting sort of hotspots happening. But what I would say is, when we think about what the role of this broader ecosystem is, what we're really seeing is that that's one piece. But there's so many other pieces that are there as well. And the work that you guys are doing on the ground in communities, that's super important. And how we can build that up and then bring it to scale through the sort of resource and like fast scale potential that mobile network operators can bring is sort of really where we're focused as well.
Thank you. And for Paul, how has Clear Global been working with communities for community-led data collection in African languages?
Yeah, thank you. So when you think about community-led data collection initiatives, I want to give an experience of what we have at Clear Global. So Clear Global has a community of language speakers from across the globe of over 100,000 people who over the years have been volunteering and collaborating with us to do translation work. So basically language services, translating from the majority languages into minority languages. And so we built that community over the years, resourcing it and ensuring that they are available when we need them. So in the current landscape and in the AI landscape, we are using the same community to collect voice data in low resource languages. And we are talking about using communities. We are involving them in the entire system, involving their voices in what we do. We are collecting voices from people, but we want them to be in the process of that collection, helping us to build the systems that speaks to what enables them to collect voice data that then can be used for creating AI models and contributing to data that is open source and available for other organizations to use as well. So the community is at the heart of what we do. They are basically the people that enable our work to be easier. And this community is spread across the globe, but we are targeting low resource communities in Africa and parts of Asia.
Thank you. And last but not least, Chinazo, as you then usher us into the second part of this. Firstly, how has Data Science Nigeria been working on African language NLP in health governance and policy in Nigeria? And then if you could then usher us into telling us, like, where has language been the biggest barrier and how have you worked around it?
Thank you. So I'll cite two use cases. One of them is in health. So we developed a solution for delivering maternal services to women of reproductive age. And so we try to integrate AI to make it more efficient. What existed prior to that was women calling call centers, making calls to call centers, inquiring about family planning, reproductive services, and getting responses for that. So there were limited agents who were responding to them, and we needed to use AI to make that more efficient. But this happened at a time where voice AI was not rampant, and so we resorted to chat, text, where we had a chatbot that could give them the same information in Hausa language. Now, the gap that introduced was that they were familiar with talking, just like it's more natural for people to talk than to chat. And so when we developed this solution as a text or as a chat interface, we realized you needed some level of literacy to even type in your local language, even as much as that solution was available in Hausa language. And so the way we worked around it was to go back to the drawing board and develop the voice version where they can interact freely in their natural habitat, just the way they would speak as if they were talking to an agent. And so that was the lesson and the workaround, the mode of delivery. Even though you're delivering the local language or the indigenous language, what is the mode that will make it more efficient? The second use case is in policy mining. So we also work with subnational governments to help them access all their policy documents. One thing we've noticed with African governments is having lots and lots of data, but not in the format that can be used by these models. So we have stack and stack of manual documents across ministries, departments, agencies. And so we started with one Ministry of Science, Innovation and Tech. We digitized the much of the documents we could. And so what we also did, where we saw there will be a language barrier, was to ensure that those documents were translated properly. And beyond translating beyond the translation from English to Hausa, it was also the nuances, the cultural, religious nuances, if they are accessing these documents. So what we tried to do was to get the person in charge, be the commissioner, to be able to access all the policies that has been done in the past, if they want to understand what policy on education, what consequences policy on education has on health, and vice versa. They're able to just access where the biases are, how they are, what are the gaps in their policies across board. And so we went beyond translating and making it available in their local language to also include the religious and cultural nuances, what the chatbot could. We developed a whole engineering prompt framework of how the model should take cognizance of terms like, if it's hijab for the Muslims, if it's traditional marriage rights, all the terms that combine to make them, beyond the language, are combined to make them a people. So that was, one of the things we learned in building that, that language solution.
Thank you. My next question is going to be to both Ruth and Sonia. Firstly, to Ruth, what have been the right investment conditions that are making resourcing of African language data sets? What are they? What do they look like? And then to Sonia, like, what investment principles do you think can travel to the African language NLP context?
There we go. It's a great question, and I think one that everybody would love to know the exact answer to. I think from our perspective, what we're seeing is that it's pretty well understood that this is a really critical issue. In our latest research, we came across a study that was done, I believe by Microsoft, so take it or leave it, but 20% of the low resource language markets take up AI at 20% of the rate of high resource language markets. So it's a really, really big gap. So I think we know that's a really big problem. What we're seeing in terms of the investment and where it's coming from and what works, we know from our members that MNOs are really interested in investing in this, again, because there's a really clear-cut business case for them to do so. And a lot of the big problems is around investing in the actual infrastructure, right? It's data centers, it's compute, it's accessibility. MNOs are investing in that because they need to, and in often cases, they're one of the only players that have the resource to invest in it, but also are doing it really actively. So some of our partners across the continent, that's one of the key things that they bring to this conversation. So with this example of Orange in Senegal, they've partnered with Meta and they've partnered with OpenAI, but they're really clear because of sovereign AI issues that all of the development of the models that they're building will be done within their own facilities. So they've invested in their own data centers. And all of the development around the models that they're building to integrate Wolof into AI-generated sort of chatbot assistants is really targeted towards their customer support. That's the easiest gateway for them to get involved with this, and it's oftentimes the most imperative for them. So because of that, there's a real drive for sort of that hardware level investment. I think where we're seeing gaps is in understanding how we can connect what others are doing on the ground with those investments. And that's part of the work that GSMA is doing, is to say, okay, and this is sort of the central premise of the GSMA African Languages Initiative, is to say, the MNOs are not always best placed to do the actual development. There's innovators on the ground that are doing that. But what the MNOs can do is to open the access to the infrastructure. It's useful for them as well. And then to think about how we can scale rapidly once those models are in place. So I think it's an interesting dynamic.
Thank you. And over to you, Sonia, around what's transferable. Yeah.
Yes, I think there is a lot of transferable structural issues, such as who gets represented in the data, who participates in system design, and then who benefits from the infrastructure that's being funded. And I know we'll talk about this later, but I think that's also something that funders should be looking out for, is like very clear understanding of who benefits from the technology that's being developed by your investment. And what we've learned from our work with under-resourced institutions with regard to data and AI systems is that when we treat data and AI as isolated tools, that's often when these projects fail. These technologies don't get adopted when they're just treated as an isolated tool. There's so much people and process that goes into both building technology and adopting it. And so I think that that principle is very transferable across these contexts, always keeping in mind who the technology is being built for, and then how to engage stakeholders so that they're actually willing to adopt this technology and ensuring that it's useful for them.
Thank you. And to close this round off, I'm going to focus on the partnership between Clear Global and Kobo. So for Tino, since with building these low resource language pipelines, what has that taught you as an institution around what responsible AI actually requires for humanitarian and for the MERL context?
Yeah, how much time do we have?
Briefly.
Yeah, I think when we started, to be honest, 6 years ago, we stressed the importance of ethics. This was before generative AI and Transformer and GPT and Claude have even existed as we know them today. On the one hand, it affirms that it is extremely important to think about it and never to leave it because, oh, maybe this one company invests in it and let's just put all our hopes into it because they are going to address this. And I think what you're describing the MNOs are doing is, in many ways, it's a useful piece of the puzzle. It addresses some of the needs in countries where there's perhaps a commercial market and all of a sudden that gap closes and you have a country in Africa where all of a sudden language technology jumps significantly, but then neighboring countries, even languages within the same country, don't benefit from that. So the minority just shifts to other places. And for us, the ethics of it come in two really important buckets. One is, how do we train the models? Where does it actually come from? And we see that where there's a commercial incentive, multinationals, big corporations do create models to make these technologies accessible. But where they don't, we have to decide what data do we feed it, how do we train these models? So collecting this data takes the shape of either using data you already have, maybe you can access it through existing pipelines, through existing repositories, through existing work that maybe the organization has done. That has its boundaries. What if you're using a lot of call centers and you record everyone's voices and you think all of a sudden we have all of that voice data, we've transcribed it, let's feed it into a model creation. Seems pragmatic, but highly risky, because what people say in a call center, in a humanitarian emergency might be extraordinarily sensitive, high privacy risks. So while that may be available and accessible, you probably shouldn't use it to train speech models, especially if you're going to make them publicly accessible. So what we're doing instead is actually creating training data from scratch with local communities, but not using actual lived experiences. So it's, in a way, it's synthetic data, but from real people. They're talking about real life events, not to them, but about the community. It's basically without the privacy risks involved. The second big bucket, briefly, is how do we make these models accessible? And to us, that is extremely important. Kobo is open source in all of its ways, but for speech recognition, for machine translation, for generative AI models, we strongly believe that the work that we put in and the money that we invest in creating these models should result in open weights models and open source language models. The training data should be open source. So what we're doing with Clear Global, all of those models will be freely accessible, not just to our organizations, to anyone else who wants to build other language technology on top of that. And to us, that's the ethical imperative, that if we're going to put all this money and effort in, it needs to be open at the end of the day.
Thank you. And for Paul, who are the communities that you're like, who's in the room when you're building, when you're training this data? And also, like, what have you seen changes when communities co-own the process?
Who is in the room? All right. That's a big question. Yeah, but I think the key stakeholders need to participate in the entire ecosystem. And I talk about the community from my perspective and from the perspective of Clear Global, is that communities should be involved in creating the data. So if it is voice data or transcriptions, communities should be involved in evaluating the models. I think NLP engineers seated in this room or elsewhere, you are used to these automated metrics for measuring how good a model performs. But I think it is important to include the communities. Human evaluation is a key component that needs to tell us how models actually perform in real life situations. If it is in the crisis that Tino was mentioning, how well do those models actually perform? We cannot just rely on the metrics that NLP engineers sit in the room to, to create and say this works in 50% accuracy or 60%. We need real human evaluators. And this is where the community needs to have their seat in the room to make the decisions of how well a model actually operates or performs in a particular use case. Okay, so we need the community and we need NLP engineers, and when that requires that certain investment is put into incentivizing the community so that what they generate actually benefits them but also is usable and accessible to others in the ecosystem. And that's why I think being in the room is important in this case. Thank you.
In that line of co-designing, Chinazo, like what has it been like co-designing with government and public sectors? Like what has that been like on the ground from your experience?
So for us, co-designing means getting every critical stakeholder in the room, be it the decision makers at the top or the frontline workers at the bottom. So what we've learned is if we need to take 10 days, 1 month to engage all the stakeholders, but it's important that stakeholder engagement is a critical part of the product development or project execution. And so in practice, we've had cases where we have to identify all the stakeholders. Who are the people that will ensure that this solution interfaces with the public? And who are those public that will actually use it? So we get everybody maybe in separate rooms, but we speak with them. And then for the decision makers, they have a different target. They are looking at things differently. They want to see how their, for example, population data is projected. So for a solution we developed on micro planning, health service delivery, where we have frontline workers taking vaccinations to settlements, vaccinating children, providing ANC services to women, all those kind of stuff. And it has to do with population estimation. So the guys at the top are interested in how you project their population for different reasons. For political especially, if they claim there are 3 million people, they want to be sure that your solution projects that 3 million so that during election, they are standing by it. So if you come back to say their population is 1 million, they're not going to take it. So you have to align with them from that angle. You also need to be sure that it ties, whatever solution you're building ties with the objectives, the goal of the government and all that. And when you're done with that, you go to the frontline workers, the people who go to the field, those who actually use the product. And so for every single time we develop every version of the solution, we pilot it for both categories of stakeholders. We pilot it to the decision makers, we get their feedback, and then we go to the field as well and pilot for these actual end users. And we've seen some discrepancies between how the two, react to things. The guys at the bottom, some of the times are disgruntled because what is being projected is not the actual thing. So we try to find a balance so that they being the actual adopters, they will be the final users who are taking this chatbot to the field, who are using it for route optimization to find the missed population, the missed children to be vaccinated and all of that. And so co-designing for us means we're identifying everyone who needs to be in the room at every step. We've also had a situation where we needed to confirm or validate some formulas. So, for this micro planning, there are some standard formulas that is used to estimate number of vaccines, doses and all that. So we also identified who are the critical people, even though the guys at the top have given us the formula to say, oh, this is what we use to estimate in the States. We also met people who actually procure these vaccines, who know how these numbers work, to say, okay, can you look at these things? And at some point, it meant we had to stay under the 3, literally, because it was a public health facility in a rural area and it was busy that day. So we had to sit under the 3 to validate those formulas, so just to be sure that that product works for any level of stakeholder. So yeah, for us, co-designing means getting everybody who is critical to that product in the room.
Thank you for that. I would like to volley back to Sonia and to Ruth. Firstly, to Sonia around what does a request for funding or investment need to show in order for an institution such as yours to feel that a project truly serves underrepresented communities? We'll start with that, then I'll go to Ruth.
Yeah, I think my fellow panelists have actually naturally touched upon a lot of these principles, but when I think about what a strong proposal looks like that serves underrepresented communities, I think it needs to demonstrate clear and upfront thinking in a couple different arenas. So the first would be community participation and co-design, which I know we've talked a lot about on this panel, but I think that needs to be something that is thought about upfront. What will co-design look like? What will we want to learn through co-design? And then how will that directly be incorporated into the technology? So the co-design and the technology, the building of the technology cannot be like two separate tracks. They have to be inherently intertwined. I think that's really important to show clear thinking on. The next is a credible data stewardship plan. So again, upfront thinking around if we're collecting data, what are we going to do with it? How are we going to store it? How are we going to have guardrails around it? Who is going to be a steward of this data? Where will it go? Where will it live? Also, evaluation methods grounded in context, which I think we've touched upon a lot in this panel, but how do we evaluate that the technology actually works in the context that it's being designed for, not just in some hypothetical scenario? And that's often important to think about upfront, and also important to think about throughout the process of developing whatever technology, model, infrastructure, et cetera, you're thinking about. Another one that I think is often overlooked is sustainability beyond the grant period. So it's like very, very, it's very telling if a grantee is thinking about how a project could be sustainable beyond the period of the grant that they're applying for. That's sort of how you avoid the pitfall of doing only pilot-based investment and only building pilots. And then the last one is just like evidence and concrete thinking around the real problem being solved. So centering proposals around the human problem or the workflow problem that's being solved, as opposed to building cool technology for the sake of building cool technology, I think is very important.
Thank you for that. Ruth, do you think realistically that MNOs can help build language infrastructure for MERL? What did you do well with the Bridging Languages Gap project?
Tough question. For MERL, I don't know. So I think MNOs and the role that they play is in scaling and investing. And it's in sort of opening the door to other partnership. And I think where we see real gaps in our sort of work in the continent and also in other low resource markets around the world is really in that investment gap. So where they are doing that and where they also are creating, because of the fact that they are investing very heavily in infrastructure and starting to develop models and work with others who are developing these language models, they are creating feedback loops, which is a very important testing environment. Now, it's never going to be a situation where they will share that data, I think, broadly with people who want to sort of understand the impacts, but they are refining models in a way because they have access to the volume of users and customers, and because they want to make sure that the products they're developing based on those language models are working effectively, that tapping into those feedback loops becomes an important sort of avenue. And so that is a really interesting prospect for MERL. With some of the AI-based initiatives that we're funding through our innovation fund, it's where that sort of intersects is that we're funding 2 language accessibility initiatives. Both of them are B2B model, and they're deep tech in the sense that it's not business to customer, it's in the background, it will be sold to another company and they will use their service to make their own services accessible. When we think about how we measure the effectiveness of that, it becomes logistically quite difficult because we're not able to find out from the users because the users aren't accessible to us. So when we think about that, what becomes important is thinking about those feedback cycles. And that is something where MNO engagement and the reports that we get, we'll never get the specific data. They will never disclose that, nor should they for their own GDPR purposes. But they can provide insight and sort of understanding of what's changing, what has not worked, and at an aggregate level, what we're seeing about language model sort of reflecting representation and where those gaps are.
Thank you. We're going to shift to the rooms shortly, but before we do that, I would like to ask Tino first. In one sentence, how should, like, for example, your responsible AI framework that you've developed at Kobo, how should that shape the way evaluators use and audit NLP tools?
Oof, in one sentence. I would say, first of all, the framework we have for responsible AI is for building tools and creating new methods, including language technology, and doing so responsibly. So the first thing for us is evaluating the technology we build, not just the technology we use off the rack, whether it's Claude or ChatGPT. So if we're building new technology, which is what Kobo does primarily, we need to self-evaluate that we're not making something worse. We're not putting some terrible tool in the hands of other organizations. Now it's the task also to the humanitarian development organizations to evaluate any tool, whether it's ours or any commercial models. Is this the model that we can trust? Is it accurate? Is it biased? Where does the data go? And so the ethical equation needs to go in both ways, to the users and the technologists.
Thank you. And to close this round off, then we will pass it over to the audience. For you, Paul, how do you keep evaluators, developers, and language communities working together rather than in sequence? In one sentence.
Yeah, in one sentence. All right. So keeping all these stakeholders working together is ensuring that each of these stakeholders recognize the piece of the puzzle, and that they are playing into the right positions for the greater or the end that is so desired. When you realize that we need NLP, we need language support for expertise, we need a community to give us data and evaluate the model, and we need users. So think about people who actually use this model. So communities like farmers and who need information about farming practices or impending crisis that could be detrimental to their crops. Think about community health workers that need to communicate with women in the villages to pass some health information. So everyone needs to realize and recognize their piece of the puzzle that is important for the ultimate goal of what is desired. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to open up to the floor for questions. If anyone has one, is there anyone with a question? Two, last question? Okay, so we'll take questions, then we'll do a closing round. Yes, yes, Carlos.
Thanks so much, and thanks everyone to the panelists. That was a great session. My name is Carlos Llerena, and just one question to you, Sonia, because something that you said at the end resonated so much around not building cool technology just for the sake of it. And one of the things that we've seen ourselves is that, there's a lot of proposals out there that focus on the usage of AI. And sometimes when we look at the problem that we're trying to solve, we go back and we're like, okay, this is the problem. This is how we're going to solve it. There's some technology in it. And then we go back and where's the AI? Crap. And then we go back and say like, okay, the AI would be this, and that's how we're going to solve the problem. But it feels like a stretch. So you're just wondering how the foundation is approaching this so that it's not AI first, but kind of like problem first. And do we need AI to solve it accordingly? Just something that resonated. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really hard question because I think it's a really common pitfall that funders are falling into right now is like wanting to invest in like AI. AI is very important, but trying to apply AI as a solution to all problems. So I think one approach that the foundation is taking is when it comes to AI, doing a lot of due diligence around what problems it could actually be effective in solving, and then soliciting proposals in those particular arenas. So sort of doing this in a very strategic way and like getting very specific with the problems that we're trying to solve with AI, because I agree this is a very, very common pitfall. But I will say I think it's tough. It's tough to avoid, especially in the current environment, especially if you're a techno optimist and really believe in that AI is going to change all these arenas that we work in. So I think it's something that funders especially need to be very cognizant of. Yeah.
So thank you very much. This is a really interesting conversation. So I work in development, so not coming from an AI background, but still very keen to kind of start participating. And wanted to ask, is there anything that organizations can do who have existing kind of language repositories to participate. So, for example, we have a few thousand scripts and different kind of written creative content in about 100 low resource African languages. These are all paired with also recorded content, so like short spots, longer videos, things like that. So feels like something that could potentially help with training. So yeah, just anyone.
The question, is it sensitive data? Is it data you could make public?
It's all public, so it was all kind of
No, could it be made public?
yeah, it could be made public.
That's great. I think, and that's a really good question, because I think we should encourage that this be made public. I think disclosing it and saying where it came from, how it was collected, thinking about should anything of that be anonymized, is it really sensitive or not? That's the hard question. But on a broad scale, if we can make it public and you have paired data that's combining audio and written transcripts, that is gold. We spend a lot of money right now in different countries trying to create that training data. And so, yeah, I think anyone having that repository internally who thinks that this could be helpful, especially for languages where you know nothing else exists commercially for those languages, please do share it. I think we don't expect everyone to know exactly how to upload it to Hugging Face and such things. So I think we have great people happy to help with that. But yes, please, absolutely.
I can also say, just to add to that, I totally agree. And there are lots of localized initiatives where people are trying to get this data. So a really easy way to do it is to partner with one of them, and they will be more than happy to sort of support in uploading that to whatever platform or is most useful. So very happy to help direct that as well.
Thank you.
Yes, just a quick one. You made Kobo, you made a point, and I just need a clarification on. You mentioned that these big tech giants, when you look at their models, you don't know where it sits and all that. But on the contrary, we are also using their base models to train our data. So I just want to find out from your end if you are doing it from scratch or you're using a particular base model to train, your data sets. That's one. Also, the other question is a lot of open weights are online, available for everyone, but there's a few documentation as to how to integrate it into our application. So we are promoting open source, but in terms of how to integrate it is quite, silent. So I just want to find out from your end, in terms of what you have now, does it also help in terms of integrating it into other applications? So just on that point, thank you.
I'll be quick. So first of all, at Kobo, we only use generative AI that is open weight, so open source for AI. So we have a strong sense that this is the best way for the sector to use these models, and they're extremely good. We evaluated 46 models, LLMs, and we found really the best open weights models are par and in many ways better than some of the commercial models, besides the fact that we can run them in complete isolation, separate from any commercial provider. So that's the first one. Absolutely. And I strongly evangelize for any organization to look into that. It is very feasible. It is actually much cheaper in many cases, but most importantly, high levels of data privacy protection. For training our own model for speech recognition, we rely on open models as well. Some of those are, in fact, all of the open weights models I was just talking about, they're created by a big company. They're not created by researchers in our labs. These are big companies like OpenAI or Google releasing an open weights model of their tools. We can then fine tune and improve them. And for speech recognition in particular, we absolutely use some of those big models that were previously created by these big research labs, and then we fine tune them for specific languages. So certainly we know where these models come from, but none of the data goes ever to the producer. They've released the technology, they've openly licenses. We say, thank you very much. This is the open source ethos. We will make what we produce also openly available for others.
Thank you very much. And to close us off, I would like to ask each of you what your parting shot is, and then and then we'll wrap up. And if you'd like to continue the conversations, Our panelists will be outside as well, and then you can continue the conversations. So quickly, to start with you, Chinazo, what is your parting shot?
Okay, so my parting shots will be, since we're talking about monitoring and evaluation, it will be to build a community, a language community, not just the data collectors, the data annotators, the community validators, even the African-led benchmark initiatives. So we don't see them as data sources that we use and discard. We build that ecosystem and support it sustainably, so that, after one project and, as the project keeps coming and as AI keeps evolving, we have that community to support. And then to fund that, since we have two of them on the call, we can go beyond AI, so AI product development. We can begin to invest in community validation, sustainable stewardship of these data, post projects. We can begin to invest in data annotators, data collectors as separate project, not just the AI development. So that'll be my passing shot.
Thank you. Oh,
Yeah, thank you. For me, because we're talking about evaluation, I think about certain imperatives in the value chain. So we are talking about evaluating data and models, but I'm thinking about at the start of data collection. And from our experience, communities are crying for ethical practices in the entire process. Many a times communities are presented with very technical terms and conditions and, in the consent process, and it becomes a box ticking exercise. And, data collectors are carrying away consent forms having been consented, but communities do not really understand the risk and the rights that are involved in the entire process. And so for me, an imperative is for us to entrench ethical practices in the consent process, making sure that the consent is localized, understandable, and that communities are consenting to what they actually understand. Okay, thank you so much.
thank you. Yes, Ruth.
I think quickly, the key takeaway for me is that there's a role for everyone in this sort of journey. And it's really important that everyone is able to work together and collaborate, because I think no one actor is able to meet all of the needs of getting all of these languages covered. And it is a critical and increasingly urgent project for everyone to be involved in. So I think across this value chain, the collaboration is a key driver of this. Wherever you are within the ecosystem, it's really important that sort of the work is happening together.
Thank you. Yes, Sonia.
Yeah, so actually building on your point, I would emphasize that there is a lot of urgency to move fast, but it's important to balance the urgency with thoughtfulness and co-design and community collaboration. Because if we don't do that, we're at risk of building technology that's not adopted and not sustainable. So very important to keep that balance in mind.
Thank you. And Tino.
I love what I was going to say something similar, but in fact, I'll build on that. I think we do want to move fast because the skills gap on language technology, especially in Africa, but in many other places in the world as well, is widening. We've seen with mobile technology that the skills gap decreased for about 15 years. Now it's widening at a pace that is worse than what we saw in the 1990s. Communities are left behind, as you said earlier, because these new technologies, AI in particular, are completely inaccessible unless you speak a majority language really well. And that, because these are exponential technologies, that increases in really fast. If you don't speak good English or some of these other languages, you're not going to vibe code anytime soon. You're not going to create a local startup in your community anytime soon, even if there's a Starlink on your roof. It doesn't help you because you need to speak those languages. And so I think we need to move fast. And I think the multinationals have a role to play, but I think because there's no commercial or little commercial incentive to target these languages we're talking about, their role cannot be, we hope they will build these language technologies. Their role, frankly, is to help us fund this gap. And it's not a huge gap to fund. If we want to roll out 100 more languages in Africa that are completely underfunded and will not be available commercially, we're talking about a minimal sum if we look at the general capex being thrown around these days. So I think it's our job to speak to the funders, make the case that these are languages we need to invest in, why we need to do so urgently, and then, you know, within five years, I think we can close this gap. Really, it's an ambitious gap, but I think we can do it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the panelists and thank everyone in the room. During this conversation, we've named the gaps, that they are structural and they are technical. And I think it has been evidence that African languages are not represented, not underrepresented, not because the data doesn't exist, but then that also is an issue of that the investment logic, the community trust, and the collaboration infrastructure must be built at the right scale, and the work continues outside this room. And on that note, I would like to thank you, everyone. Our time is up. And if you'd like to continue the conversations, please engage any of the panelists that are on the room. So thank you very much.